She was the only female member of the artistic group known as Les Six. I'm the classical nerd, and today we're talking about Germaine Tailleferre. Germaine Tailleferre was born Germaine Tailleferre in 1892 into an unhappy arranged marriage, and as an infant she survived cholera. She learned the rudiments of music from her mother, often improvising at the piano, and although she was at the top of her classes at the Paris Conservatoire, her father steadfastly refused to support her. To give you a taste of her father's sleaziness, he introduced her mother to his mistress. He hated the idea of women in music so much that mother and daughter had to conspire to keep her participation at the Conservatoire a secret, and it only came out after he read about one of her first prizes in the newspaper. He previously said that female musicians were no better than streetwalkers, and now all of a sudden he was proud of his daughter's accomplishments, although still not wanting to support her financially. So she changed her name to Tailleferre just to spite him. It was at the Conservatoire that she met the group of composers who would become known as Les Six. Les Six desired to take up the mantle of satire and whimsy as pioneered by Eric Satie, and to develop a style of specifically French music that they felt had not been really captured by the Impressionists of Debussy and Ravel. The aging Satie called her his musical daughter. One story about her musical gift says that she played a Bach fugue perfectly at sight, only to realize that she had later accidentally transposed the whole thing. She was not just a musician, but also a painter of considerable gift as well. She even contemplated taking up needlepoint as a career option, but stayed focused on music, even through the instability of World War I. The 1920s saw a major increase in production from Tailleferre, who produced some of her best and most enduring works, including her first piano concerto, as well as a concertino for harp. The former piece was compared favorably to J.S. Bach, its primary compositional influence. In addition to the concertino, she wrote a great many harp works in her lifetime. Despite the disagreements between Les Six and Ravel, Ravel was actually of great help to Tailleferre's career. He gave her lessons and advice throughout the decade, although their friendship was terminated suddenly at the end of the decade with no extant explanation. She married the American artist Ralph Barton, who proposed on the very day they met, and thereafter moved to New York City in 1925. Barton actually actively discouraged her from composition. She moved to France to work on various projects, but then moved back to New York, where she fell into severe depression. The depression came from the failed state of her marriage, and she actually attempted suicide several times before finally attaining a divorce. Blame for the breakdown of the marriage cannot be fully placed on Barton, for he had a severe case of bipolar disorder that was fueled by the stress of their incompatibility. When she became pregnant, he threatened to kill her and their unborn child, and although she lost the baby due to stress, it was clear that Barton had gone completely insane. After their divorce, he went back to New York and shot himself. However, it was through Barton that she met and befriended Charlie Chaplin, who always wanted her talents in Hollywood, but she always declined. The early 1930s shows music that emphasized her depressed state of mind after the breakdown of her marriage, but she remarried to a lawyer in 1932, the father of her infant daughter. He, too, refused to support her musical aspirations. Why? I have no idea, but his alcoholism probably had something to do with it, as he would often accidentally spill ink on her manuscripts while she was working on them. Her output decreased as she raised her daughter. She abandoned Europe during World War II, but returned in 1946 and was just as productive as she had ever been. The Nazis had used her house as a command post during the war, and, as she suspected, all of the manuscripts that she had been forced to leave behind were no longer anywhere to be found. She ended up divorcing her second husband in 1955, the same year that she became a grandmother, and she took a very active role in the raising of her granddaughter. Her compositional work turned to the mediums of TV, film, and radio. Most of Tailleferre's music was published posthumously, leaving her true legacy to those who came after her death. Unable to make a living strictly as a composer, she took up several teaching posts. She eventually became the accompanist for a children's music class at the age of 84. She kept on composing, however, undeterred as ever, right up until her death in 1983 at the age of 81. She was the last surviving member of Les Six. Though long considered one of the more minor Les Six composers, as more and more of her music has been published and thus recorded, her work has been seen in a new light and has been reevaluated. She was as unafraid of modern techniques as she was of incorporating musical humor, although she was more comfortable with the latter, as her late serial experiments attest. She remained modest about her work despite her dedication to it, saying that she wrote music simply because doing so amused her. She remained remarkably consistent in her musical language throughout her entire life, able to return to early compositions and rework them in the same style when she was in her 80s. Her many contributions to the harp repertoire have flown under the radar, despite that instrument's stereotypically French sound. When told that her compositions were feminine, Tailleferre shrugged, saying, "I write what I feel. If it is music, then it is music." And her 200 pieces certainly bear that out.